the fact that most speakers today have found this bill wanting.
My Lords, that's one way of putting it. This bill has been so hacked about from every bench, so lacerated, that it seems an act of almost wanton cruelty to take out my own cleaver and join the mob. So in the spirit of balance, at least of karmic balance, let me at least preface my remarks by saying that it's a good problem to have, in one sense, right? We're talking about a problem caused by improvements in medical care and increased longevity, and we're looking at ways in which the wealth of an increasingly well-off society can spill over into the social care section. In the end, wrote Goethe, and what's always struck me as the single most depressing line in the whole corpus of European literature, in the end, we are all King Lear. Of course, it wasn't quite true in his day. It isn't true today. But we do have a challenge, like every developed country, ensuring that we're not stretched out upon the rack of this tough life any longer than necessary. So I wanted to agree with what I thought was a devastating takedown of the proposals by the noble Lord Eatwell. But I'm going to disagree with one aspect of his remarks, where he spoke about the reduced proportion of GDP going on health and social care. My lords, that strikes me as not a great measure. A more useful metric is what is the absolute amount. If you can grow an economy very quickly, then a smaller proportion of that economy can be a much larger sum. And it seems to me that the question, therefore, if we're looking at how to fund this or indeed any other aspect of our welfare system, is where do we strike the balance between getting instant revenue now by raising taxes and ensuring that growth continues, thereby generating future surpluses. And if, as in this case, we're looking at the prospect of increasing costs, because I think we can reasonably expect that longevity will continue to increase and that there will continue to be medical advances, how do we ensure that it is funded sustainably? How do we ensure that we don't, in removing money from the productive bit of the economy now, reduce the overall size of the economy and so damage future revenue? I agreed, though, very much with what the noble Lord said about the craziness as we come out of the worst downturn we've had, worse than anything we saw in either war or the recession, the craziness of taxing jobs. Of all the ways that we could be raising revenue, this seems to me the most misconceived. We should, on the contrary, be finding ways to reduce taxes on employment and on investment so that we encourage people as furlough ends, so we encourage firms to be investing and hiring more, and thereby, of course, generating more economic activity and generating, in the medium term, more government revenue. I would be very happy to see national insurance scrapped. I think if we consider the case made against it by the noble Lord Lipsey, and by my noble friend Lord Lansley, it's quite difficult to see how anyone, I agree with what Lord Lipsey said, how anyone would invent it today. I'd very much support my noble friend Lord Forsyth of Drumlean's idea that we should be honest and merge it with income tax and stop the pretense that it's somehow a hypothecated tax paying for social care. Of course, governments will never do that because they will never admit the amount that they're actually taking in income tax, and so they pursue the strategy of having lots of little taxes to add up to one big one as a way of disguising the overall tax burden. I also agree with the noble Lord on the absurdity of hypothecation. It's not that it's a bad idea, it's impractical. Didn't work for Gordon Brown, hasn't worked for any other leader. It's impossible to devise a system where a chancellor can't simply substitute a different budget. I mean, it's defeated every attempt at doing so. And finally, I agreed with the noble Lord Eatwell when he spoke very truly and said, it's in the nature of taxes to go up. That has been true of almost every tax, going right back to the introduction of income tax as a temporary measure to pay for the Napoleonic Wars. Governments find that they don't have the revenue they need, and they have to widen and deepen the tax. So let's be clear about what we're talking about. It's going to be a ratchet where there is constant pressure for higher budgets, for higher caps, and so on. Why are we doing this? Why have we picked this tax and this method? And why, as every other bench has asked, why are we doing it in such a hurry? Well, I was very struck by how few people in the other place on the Conservative benches voted against it. The my noble friend the Minister, with commendable honesty, described it as a permanent increase in the size of the state. That's absolutely right. How many people on Conservative benches in either house went into politics in order to pursue a permanent increase in the size of the British state? And yet there were, 5 people in another place who voted against? And I suspect that that's because when asked in isolation, this measure polled very well. It always does. If ever you phrase an opinion poll question as, should we raise taxes to pay for insert desirable thing, you always get a very large yes to that, because people have been conditioned by our political discourse to hear the question as, are you a nice person? Are you selfless, or are you greedy? They can't tick a box in that opinion poll that says, well, only if it's accompanied by efficiency gains, or yes, I'll happily fund more clinicians, but I don't want to fund more NHS diversity officers, or what's happened to the 20 billion that's already been spent, or could it be done with the following priorities? And so they say yes, they don't want to look ungrateful. But my noble friend Lord Tebbit, when he was the Conservative chairman, once said the only opinion poll on tax that matters, the only question that elicits a valid response is, do you feel that the amount of tax you personally are paying is too low, too high, or just about right? And I suspect that when people see the implications, not least the second-order implications of there being fewer jobs and therefore less overall revenue and slower growth, that there will be a very different attitude. Of course, your lordships don't need to worry about opinion polls. The function of this House is precisely that it can take a longer view and it can bring perspective to these questions. And it seems to me that one thing which is clear, if you look at the long view, if you take a proper perspective, is that the way to have growth, the way to have an economy which can more easily then accommodate increases in healthcare, in social care, and all the rest of it, is by pursuing the formula that has always and everywhere increased economic performance, freer trade, lighter regulation, and lower, flatter, and simpler taxes.
My Lords, it's with some trepidation that I add my voice to those